Hello everybody and welcome to Sport by Numbers. Thank you again for joining me on today's episode. We'll be talking about how Manchester United, the greatest football club in the world, have gone from being masters of success to being specialists in ruining player value. I will be highlighting 9 players from the last 10 years. The issues at Manchester United are monumental and numerous, as we all know, but today we'll be focusing on how Manchester United have failed to develop any of these players. 2, we'll be focusing how instead of making profits on their player sales, they continually lose money. And 3, we will talk about how managers need to be able to make squad choices and personnel choices, but poor choices from good managers need to be contested as well. So let's get right into it with our first player example. I debated on this because there have been so many great players that you could have picked from here, but I wanted to start with probably what is the most odious of cases because it is still currently going on at Manchester United. It's Jadon Sancho. Let's see. Let's start Manchester United chased Jadon Sancho for 2 straight summer transfer wins. The first year they ended up walking away from the deal because they didn't want to overpay, which at the time was in excess of £100 million. According to Transfer Market, they valued him so highly that it was near 130 million euros. That simply was too much for Manchester United, and they insisted that they would not be bent over the table by Dortmund and overpay for Sancho. So they decided, we'll walk away. Good for you. Then they came back the exact same way every next year, and they expected things to be different. But the only difference was that Jadon Sancho had continued to do well at Dortmund for another season, and his contract was still long-term, so there was no discount really that they could get, other than to go down from 100 million to 85. At the time, they thought that was a good deal, but as we know now, that was just absolute baloney because Jadon Sancho was nowhere near worth that money. Let's just leave it at that for now. This was seen as a huge signing for Ole and United when he joined because he was expected to be the right-sided winger going forward. He was supposed to be the answer for today and for the future for Manchester United down the right-hand side, who had struggled to find someone that could complement Marcus Rashford on the left-hand side of Manchester United's attack. So this was a huge deal all around, and that would solidify the front 3. And given his tenure in the Bundesliga, it was very much expected that he would kick on here at Manchester United. Every season after he joined, though, he regressed, when everything indicated that he should be at the exact opposite. If we were to ask ourselves what has really contributed to Sancho's decay, it's really multifaceted. Like many of the other problems at the club, all multifaceted as well. It has to start with Sancho himself. There were scores of rumors that were coming out about what he was doing in his free time, and that's not to say that in his free time he should be allowed to do whatever he wanted. However, he was staying up late supposedly, and he was arriving to training late. Secondly, Erik ten Hag gave him a chance to leave the club and get right mentally, something that's entirely unheard of in the modern day game. And he went away to the Netherlands for a number of months during the middle of the season when Manchester United could have certainly used their starting winger that they paid for. But it wasn't appreciated by him because then he came back next season and he acted like a petulant child, and he called the manager a liar on social media and then refused to apologize after Erik ten Hag said that he lacked the ability to do what he needed to do, in so many words. So then, he never played for Erik ten Hag again, and that ended up leading to his first loan from Manchester United to Borussia Dortmund, the club that he had just left to join Manchester United on a loan with no obligation to buy. He came back to the club, still was not apologizing to Erik ten Hag and the club and the fans, and so he just did not play. Although they tried to make it seem like everything was hunky-dory on the US tour, it was not. He got his second loan with Erik ten Hag still as the manager for 12 months this time instead of 6 months, and this time he went to Chelsea on a loan with an obligation to buy for £25 million. This was his chance at freedom. All about being a freedom fighter. Well, for 12 months, he actually does okay. So much so that the club decides to talk to him about making the offer permanent. But the reason that they wanted to discuss the loan with the obligation and the contract with him is because at Manchester United, he's on £200,000 per week. Chelsea offered him a contract at the time to literally take a salary cut down to £150,000 per week, a pay cut of £50,000. Now, this seemed like a perfect opportunity. He was a boyhood Chelsea kid. He was playing at Chelsea. They offered him an outlet out of Manchester United. They wanted to sign him, and he was at a reasonable price. He just needed to make some concessions on his wage demands, which he refused to do. Chelsea ended up paying a penalty to us of £5 million just so they didn't have to sign him. So it's all about the money when it comes down to it for Jadon Sancho. And when his contract expires next summer, he'll still only be 26, which is incredible to think about. But again, everything comes back to the money. If it weren't about the money, and I'm willing to entertain that argument, then he would have taken Chelsea's offer to sign for that club. They had Champions League football. They still have Champions League football. They are certainly competing for titles. A lot of things there that make you just think it was all about the money. David De Gea. The loss of David De Gea is a loss that will plague us for years to come. He should have never left the club, and that's not even mentioning the colossal mistake that is his replacement in Andre Onana, or I should say was his replacement. David De Gea was the last member, really, Sir Alex Ferguson's title-winning teams. Furthermore, he was also one of our best players, if not the best player for us, for years there, while the team floundered around. He offered saves when we needed them, and kept us in games that we shouldn't have been in. If you take a look at his career projection, right, he came to us from Atletico Madrid way back in 2011. In that initial purchase, we offered him a contract at £3.6 million per year. Then came his final contract extension from the club. This was the culmination of all those years of being the best player on the team. That's £350,000 per week. That's a lot of money for your goalkeeper, even if he is your best player. I think we all knew it was too much, but at the time, he had all the leverage, and they had to cave to give it to him because they needed him, because they could not get a replacement, which is something that's a very common theme throughout Manchester United's recent history under this ownership. David De Gea won on holiday. At that time, they were negotiating a new contract for David De Gea. This time, it was not an extension of his current contract because the wages were just too astronomically high for him. And then when he came back from holiday, they decided, no, we're not going to offer you the contract, we're pulling it, that's it, there's no goodbye, no nothing, I'll see you later, it's over. That was it. The football club decided to not communicate with him. Now that was simple enough. You could have said that. The club could have also decided to sell David De Gea, as it almost did ahead of the manager with Louis van Gaal. And if it wasn't for that fax machine, we wouldn't have had David De Gea to potentially lose for free in this summer. So this was really poor asset management. And that's not even to mention his replacement. So instead of signing David De Gea to reduce wages like we should have done, he decided to go out and splash 50 million euros on a keeper that was poor at best. Quality of performances, it was nowhere near worth the money and loss on investment. This is another clear example of how the ownership has poor asset management. Next, let's talk about another relic from the past, Victor Lindelof. The Iceman, as he was known, the Swede. He came in under Jose Mourinho as well. He played well year after year after joining from Benfica for 35 million euros. He was playing very well, wasn't getting injured, and he was on a reasonable wage at 3.9 million pounds a year. 2 years into that contract, he was offered an extension, 6.24 million pounds, which is quite the pay rise, but he also deserved it based on his performances and his availability for the team. He was still a contributing member, and he was also a vital member of the squad until the conclusion of the 2021-2022 season under Alejandro Garnacho. And at that point, he still had 2 years left on his deal. That time, the club did not sell him, which is when exactly they should have, because at that point, he was beginning to decline in his performances. But he still had 2 years on his contract. Manchester United's board did not want to sell him because they viewed him as an asset. He was signed already to a reasonable wage, and it also meant that they didn't have to go out and get a replacement. They never want to go out and they never want to replace the player because they already have a player there. They expected the player that they already have can just step up and improve, when he hasn't been doing that for either a year or potentially even years. They decided to keep him for another season, but he should have been sold by the club at that point with 2 years left to go. And if not with 2 years left to go, the next summer when he only had 1 year left to go, he should have been sold then as well. They viewed him as an asset, and they thought that it was easier to keep an asset like that than have to go through the trouble of going out, scouting somebody, negotiating with a club and a player, and then signing that player, as they always do. And so what ends up happening, as we see so often with Manchester United, he ended up leaving the club on the free when his contract expired as well. So from 35 million pounds, they let him go for free, a return of zero. Similar to David De Gea, a lot of money just being wasted on poor asset management. Next, I really want to talk about Donny van de Beek. This was such a shocking transfer when it happened. Donny was part of that Ajax team that took Real Madrid to task under Erik ten Hag, which put him on the map. When Donny was bought, it was under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. What happened to him in his time here at Manchester United is really hard to fathom. So let's start off at the beginning here, right? Ajax valued him at 55 million euros at the peak during the Champions League run, but by the following summer when Manchester United would end up buying him, they were able to get him for a discount at 39 million euros. How? I have no idea. It was such a shocking transfer. It was a good player, it was on a good deal, and they actually kind of got a bargain on him. Not to mention the fact that he was ripping up trees in an Ajax team against Real Madrid on their own turf in their own competition. It was obvious that he was a club signing. Ollie didn't use him. He did make 45 appearances across the entire season that first year, but he only ended up playing 523 minutes. 523 minutes can be accomplished in just a handful of full 90-minute games. So that just shows you how sporadically that he was used by Ollie. And why is that? Because he wasn't a signing of the managers. He had no injuries in the 2020-2021 season, and he was injured in the first half of the 2021-2022 season, but did get hurt during his loan spell with Everton in the second half of that season. Under Erik ten Hag, when he finally came in the following year, the manager, again, that he was a starter on just 1 year ago at Ajax, he was shipped on loan within 6 months of Erik ten Hag joining. In 2022-2023, he finally started to establish himself in that team, starting 4 matches in a row. It looked like he was finally starting to establish himself and the Manchester United scene in his second season, which is what we usually expect players to do. However, he ended up suffering a knee ligament injury in early January that ended up sidelining him for the rest of the season and completely just ruined all the progress that he had made at Manchester United at that point. He ended up playing for Erik ten Hag, again, the same manager, in September twice. Then after that, absolutely nothing. And then eventually, when January's transfer window came and opened up, he was transferred on loan to Eintracht Frankfurt. By the time April rolled around, he ended up getting a heel injury, then sidelined him for the rest of the season again. Frankfurt ended up returning him to us, a broken player that hadn't developed at all in a number of years due to injuries, as well as a lack of playing time by managers. But that could also be explained by the fact the manager did not want him, did not ask for him, and wasn't planning on using him as a player in his system. He was finally let go ahead of the 2024-2025 season for pennies. It doesn't take a genius to see the loss from 39 million euros to 500,000 euros. When Erik ten Hag came in for his first season there, and he was barely getting used throughout the fall there, again, he only started 4 games in October to November, and then again at the end of the year from December into January 3 times, for a total of 7 appearances there. If he was not in the manager's plans, which he clearly wasn't at that point for 6 months, why did the club let him stay at the club another year, only 2 appearances, even less than the year before, and then send him out on loan again? He should have been sold that year when he clearly wasn't in the plans of the manager. And that's another reason why so many players' careers falter and their value decline, because managers don't want these signings and they don't get the choice to clear them out, because the club views them again as an asset and doesn't want to go through the hassle of selling players that they think are good signings but that the manager just refuses to use. It's a juxtaposition where the head is just simply not talking to the body, and the body doesn't want to use anything that the head says. It's a situation that we see very clearly today, again, Manuel Ugarte, as he says his name is pronounced, with the current manager in Ruben Amorim. Again, history is repeating itself over and over again. Next, let's move on to some of the glitz and glamour. Paul Pogba, I still remember when he signed. It was huge that summer. His time in Manchester United can't be summarized in one word, but it was certainly a spectacle. Him and his late agent, Mino Raiola, began a player dynamic that has sacked multiple managers since, so he's definitely well known for that, among his many other accolades. Again, there were great performances from him, especially in that Manchester derby where he came back and had those 2 goals. But Paul Pogba was more of a nuisance and a problem for Manchester United as a whole, as opposed to a positive force. Let's break it down though. Paul Pogba is a prime example of United's, let's call it stupidity. Before we signed him for £100 million, United let Paul Pogba leave for free actually in 2012 to go to Turin for the first time, I should say, where he ended up spending 3 years there, winning Scudettos, or titles, and morphing into one of the world's most creative midfielders that we ended up splashing on just 3 years later. Manchester United obviously decided that it was a mistake to let him go, but to right that mistake, they were going to have to splash the cash, and they certainly did, paying over 100 million euros for him, and on top of that, giving him a bumper contract of £10.4 million per year. His contract actually ends up increasing when United get back into the Champions League, £200,000 a week to £290,000 per week. He wasn't one of the players that the club actually made a mistake on giving an extension to, though. Even though they were trying to negotiate one with him towards the end of his deal, they did end up, however, triggering the 1-year club option in his contract, which gave United 1 more year to figure out whether they could get a contract extension with him or sell him in that summer. They did the contract extension for 1 more year to prevent him walking away for free the following year. What ends up happening the following year? He ends up walking for free anyway, again. He runs right back down to Turin to join Juventus again for free. They get some deal. Honestly, even now, it's crazy to think that the club was going to try to offer another contract to a player who had his agent attack Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, the manager at the time, in the press the night before the Champions League game that we needed to win. He spoke publicly about his desire to join Real Madrid in that final year when Manchester United were trying to negotiate a new contract with him, and he also had disciplinary issues with Jose Mourinho. Now, some might say who hasn't, but at the same time, when you add it up all together, it's a lot more trouble than he was worth considering that he wasn't always fit and he definitely was inconsistent in Manchester United, who were also inconsistent. I don't really even need to make the case, because when you let a player walk for free, sign him for £100 million, and then let him walk for free again just a couple years later, your idiocracy is highlighted without me even saying anything. Let's take a look at Erik ten Hag signings. Antony was another Erik ten Hag signing, and he should not be on the list. That's what I want to preface this by saying. He should not be on this list. The only reason that he is on this list is because the idiots in charge at the boardroom level were bold enough to think that they could get a better deal on the 40 million euros set as the price at the beginning of the summer. Instead of doing the deal right when the summer transfer window opened, they literally ended up waiting until the last day after Ajax had spent the entire summer that summer offloading numerous first-team players. But how can you expect to pay less as time goes on when they keep selling players as well? It showed categorically that the club still hadn't learned a damn thing from their chase for Jadon Sancho, which should have still been fresh in everyone's memory, except for the people at Manchester United apparently. Antony showed immediately when he got here how inflated that price tag was, with inconsistent play and a complete lack of finishing touch in the Premier League. Let's take a look at it. In season 1, which is 2022 to 2023 for him, he plays over 3,000 minutes, over 45 games played. He had no injuries in that first season, and what did we get out of that in his first year? But we only got 8 goals and 3 assists for that. In this season, his second season, under the same manager, the manager who bought him from Ajax, the same manager that gave him his breakthrough at Ajax, he actually ends up playing less than 2,000 minutes. It's roughly around 1,900 actually. And he only plays 38 games in total. Another season, no injuries. What do we get for output here? We get 3 goals and 2 assists. He wasn't considered for anything more than being a bench warmer in the FA Cup final, only 1 season after being signed for 85 million euros. The same manager that bought him didn't even think to use him in a game that he wanted to win for the title. This should have been the final straw. Season 1 is obviously about adapting, as I said, but season 2 should have been about kicking on. And since his minutes nearly decreased by half, it should have been pretty clear to the board that he obviously wasn't in the manager's thoughts going forward, and that he was also just incapable at performing at this level. Now you're 2 years into a 5-year contract. Why would you need to wait another year to get an answer that you already know? But Manchester United are the king, waiting a little bit longer to get rid of a problem that they should deal with right then and there. But in that third season, his prospects didn't improve under Erik ten Hag, which would end up being the Dutchman's final few months at Manchester United. Antony was basically a bit part player for this manager that had signed him. He was barely playing at all. When Ruben Amorim came in November, he showed that he didn't trust Antony the same way he didn't trust Casemiro. The numbers show it, the appearances show it, and so do the minutes. So what ends up happening? Unlike Casemiro, Antony gets to the winter transfer window and decides that he's got to go. So they binned him off to Sevilla so that he could join Real Betis. Now this actually ended up being a masterful stroke of luck for the player, who had been playing like crap for us and being ridiculed as a one-trick pony who all he could do was be like a fidget spinner turning around in circles, to someone that was scoring and creating goals for a Betis side that was playing in Europe at that time and doing well in La Liga as they chased Champions League qualification. It ended up going so well actually that Real Betis was talking about buying him. But this also led to a different problem, because it showed us again that ugly face of player power. While it went so well, Antony came back and said that he would not sign for any other team other than Real Betis. He sat on his hands all summer even, as other clubs like Bayern Munich even came around asking about his situation. But Antony was adamant that he wouldn't go anywhere else because he gave his palabra, which means his word. This is when properly run football clubs takes care of business. It stamps its authority on an employee that is acting petulant like a child. But they didn't do that, because that's not what Manchester United do. In the end, what did they get for their return on investment? They got 25 million euros with a 50% sell-on clause. But at 25 years old, that sell-on clause will likely be worth no more than 10 to 15 million euros in the future. And that's being generous, for being honest. Antony's just not that type of player. When we bought him, he should have been no more than 40 million euros. Should have been, could have been, but was not. And here we are. This is one of the few players that we actually got some money for. Okay, let's talk about one of our more recent players now. Alejandro Garnacho. This was a player I think most of us thought was going to be huge for us, especially after that photo of him, Rasmus, and Kobbie on the advertising boards at Old Trafford. All of those players are gone. Mainoo is still here, obviously, but we'll get to that. But life has a way of ruining the best laid plans. In this situation, there's a lot of things going on, right? Ruben Amorim deserves part of the blame for the way things ended up, but it also has everything to do with the childish behavior of the player himself over this summer. Altogether though, it's an example too of player mismanagement by the club. Before these issues with Amorim crept up last season, Garnacho was valued in excess of £70 million. Then after some issues through the season when Amorim took over, as well as some disciplinary issues for not doing what he asked apparently, Amorim ends up dropping him more and more. And so much so that when we get to the final of the Europa League, which Alejandro Garnacho dragged us to that final by scoring crucial goals and providing timely assists when we needed it, Amorim drops him, which is a huge slap in the face for the player that had helped you get there. Now, if you're a consummate professional, you would just kick on with that, even though you felt extremely disrespected. He did play, but he was only given 20 minutes to play. But what Alejandro Garnacho did after that was all on him, and the decision to sell him was absolutely the right decision. However, what we're talking about here, though, is the context of the money and the complete decay of player value. Just 1 year ago, that player is worth double what he's worth in the actual transfer that Chelsea paid for him now. When Amorim dropped him in the final and made those comments about his dedication, overnight he wiped out over 50% of Alejandro Garnacho's transfer value. Now let's take a look at the situation that I highlighted a little bit earlier when we were talking about Donny Van de Beek. Manuel Ugarte is a identical transfer basically to Donny Van de Beek. His transfer was a real wow moment because unlike Donny, the manager, Erik ten Hag, actually wanted this player and he was actually his first choice. The manager's first choice player for the position that he needed. This is something that's damn near impossible under this ownership to achieve. So it was huge. Only last year too. And if that wasn't enough, we were also getting a bargain for the player that PSG had splashed the cash on only 1 year earlier at 60 million euro. We ended up getting him for 50 million euros. And that was because PSG wanted to ship him on due to the midfield incomings that came in that better fit Luis Enrique's midfield choices. In his first season here last year, it was pretty hectic, as it was for everyone at the club, but he still managed to play all year under two separate managers as a starter for both of them. Let's take a look at the numbers here exactly. Under Erik ten Hag, before Amorim came in last season, he made the matchday squad 15 times. He ends up starting 9 of those games, and he's only an unused sub in 3 games there. In those games, he ends up playing 757 minutes across all 12 of them, which averages out to about 63 minutes a game, playing the majority of the minutes as a starter for Erik ten Hag. Ruben Amorim comes in the beginning of November, and after that, we see what? Manuel Ugarte, a player that Ruben Amorim knows very well from his time at Sporting, where he coached him. He ends up making 35 appearances in total, and he was on the matchday squad for 39 games, which means only 4 opportunities where Amorim didn't use him as a... That just speaks to his level of importance in Amorim's midfield too, because there's only 2 positions in his midfield setup all throughout last season. Now if we take a look at Manuel Ugarte's season statistics this year, what do we see? We see that under the same manager that he started for all last season, he's only made 3 starts, 11 total appearances, and he's only played 363 total minutes. What happened? What happened? I don't know. There's no true answer that's come out. What I can say though is that at the end of last season it came out that Ruben Amorim told Ugarte point blank that you are not the player you used to be at Sporting. And I don't know about you, but to me, that's his way of saying there's the door. How is it not? And if you didn't believe it, well, we're midway through December. He's got 3 starts and 360 something minutes played all season. He obviously wasn't in the manager's plan. The manager obviously must have said something to the board, but the board didn't sell him. Now Ugarte is signed for another 4 years at £6.2 million. It's so obvious again that he's just not part of the manager's plans. So with 4 years left on his contract to run, how long is he gonna stick around? Just collecting money, not being used by the manager. And he's just getting worse year after year because he's not playing. And that brings us to today's most important player in Kobbie Mainoo. Let's start with the basics. Kobbie Mainoo is one of our own. He's come through the academy and he is united through and through. He's already led the team to a title, won man of the match in that game, which was, in case you didn't know, the FA Cup final. His meteoric rise continued that summer when England ended up taking him to the Euros as an 18-year-old. As the phrase goes, if you're good enough, you're old enough. Nobody was saying then at that point that Kobbie Mainoo needed to be a starter week in and week out. And even today, nobody is saying that. But if you claim to know that you cannot buy pedigree, history, and the fans, then the reason that fans take umbrage at his treatment shouldn't be a surprise. That is a direct quote from Ruben Amorim at one of his press conferences. Ahead of Wolves most recently, this past week, he said that I understand what you were saying. You love Kobbie. He starts for England, but that doesn't mean I need to put Kobbie in when I feel I shouldn't. Alright, fine. Let's use your argument. England are the 4th best team in the world. Only 18 months ago, Mainoo was able to displace senior players in England's setup, starting alongside Declan Rice and Jude Bellingham, both €100 million players. But better yet, let's bring that case a little bit closer to home so we could showcase just how ludicrous this sounds. Last season, what do we see? When Ruben Amorim comes in, he shows that he trusts Kobbie. It's actually surprising. From the 10th onward to when Kobbie gets injured in early February of 2025, we see Kobbie start 11 games for Amorim, and he ends up making 16 total appearances for Amorim. Now, if we take a look at the other midfielders in his entourage there, what do we see? We see Ugarte is also playing a lot, as we already highlighted. He actually ends up starting 14 games during that same time and makes 18 total appearances for 1,100 minutes. Bruno, he starts 19 games and he makes 19 total appearances for a total of 1,656 total minutes. What about our other players here? Mason Mount? Well, Mason Mount ends up getting injured, making 3 starts during that same time frame and 8 total appearances for a total of 202 minutes. So he's mostly a bit part player. Casemiro, though, as I said, he was not a player that was trusted, similar to Antony, by Ruben Amorim when he came in. And we see that clear as day because he only ends up starting 4 games for Ruben Amorim from that time when he starts to when Kobbie Mainoo gets hurt, and 8 total appearances for a total of 337 minutes during that time frame. Once Kobbie Mainoo gets hurt, though, all Casemiro, and obviously the tide shifts for him, and he becomes part of Ruben Amorim's plans. When Kobbie comes back in the springtime earlier this year, what do we see? From April 7th to the end of the season, there are 12 total games played. Casemiro starts 8, makes 8 total appearances, and plays 693 minutes. Ugarte, he starts 8 games, 10 total appearances, 625 minutes. Bruno, he starts 10 games, makes 11 total appearances, 943 minutes. Mason Mount, who has been injured often all season, he starts 5 games down the stretch, 12 total appearances for him for 520 minutes of total playing time. Eriksen, who was on an expiring contract and ended up leaving this summer, he ends up starting 2 games too and makes 7 total appearances for 269 total minutes. But what about Kobbie? When Kobbie comes back from injury this second time, something is clearly different because he only starts 4 times. He appears in every single game to the end of the season, but he only plays 426 minutes. Think about that. This season, if we take a look at the statistics, somehow Mainoo has played even less. And it's not just him. It's Ugarte, as I already highlighted. We see Casemiro and Bruno Fernandes taking the bulk of the starts. Casemiro has started 13 games, made 14 total appearances, and has played 928 minutes this season. Bruno has started 15 games, made 16 total appearances, for a total of 1,415 minutes. Let's go on a little bit further. Mason Mount, one of Ruben Amorim's favorite players, he has started 7 games and made a total of 13 appearances for a total of 639 minutes. Now, we're not going to discuss his injuries yet because he's already had 2, only 1 official. That's neither here nor there. What about Ugarte? Ugarte, who clearly wasn't part of Ruben Amorim's plans, shown here again. He has only made 11 total appearances, started 3 games for us, for a total of 363 minutes, as I said earlier. And Kobbie, what about Kobbie? Young Kobbie has made 1 start. He's played in 11 games for 311 minutes. What's changed? Well, let's start with the basics and what we know. The formation. Yes, the pesky subject of the formation hasn't changed. Last season, though, Manchester United did not have Matthias Cunha, and they didn't have Brian Mbeumo either. So Bruno was occupying one of the number 10 positions that you see in Ruben Amorim's 3-4-3 system up top here. Now, with the purchase of those players, though, Bruno either has to get rotated with those 2 players that he's brought in, dropped, or get put into midfield. Because in addition to buying those 2 number 10s, he also has Amad Diallo, plus the strikers as well, and that's not even to mention Joshua Zirkzee, who could definitely play in one of those positions as well. Bruno is an incredible player, but he's clearly not a midfielder, and he's getting squeezed into midfield continually by Ruben Amorim because he only has 2 positions for midfielders. So if Cunha and Mbeumo are going to occupy the 10 spots, he has to drop down to midfield or get dropped. And since he's not going to get dropped since he's the captain, that means there's only 1 position in midfield that's open up for grabs, and that is Casemiro. But we should also remember that Ruben Amorim has explicitly said that Kobbie Mainoo is not fighting with Casemiro to start. He's fighting with Bruno to start, for Bruno's position. Since Bruno never gets taken off, he never gets subbed, how can you compete for that position? I don't know. What I do know, though, the club does not want to sell him. The club has been trying to negotiate a new contract with him since February of last year. His value has only gone down. It continues to go down further and further. And most importantly, not about the money, it's about the player. The club have handcuffed the player here into a situation which he cannot get away from. He's been a consummate professional. After he asked to go on loan in the summer, he's gotten his head down, he's trained hard, said nothing in the press, done no interviews, done nothing about liking social media posts. He has just been going to work every day trying to break into the team. Ruben Amorim says he feels bad for him because he's training so well, but he can't pick more than 11 players. And those 11 players have been playing well, according to Ruben, if you listen to him. So, if players have been playing well, and Kobbie Mainoo is only fighting against his captain to start, is that possible? On the evidence, it's not. So, what gives? What will give? I don't know. What I do know, though, is that our recent history in player development, especially in the youth department, has been abhorrent. We haven't been able to cultivate any talent. We've had loads and loads of young players that have come through the academy and have graduated to the senior team. But the senior team is made up of players that are failing and underperforming on expectations. So how have Manchester United become specialists in ruining player value and player careers? Well, it's quite simple. It boils down to the fact that Manchester United don't sell players when they should sell players. They don't want to sell players because that means they have to replace them, potentially spend more money than they're going to get for the player that they're going to sell because it's a poor asset, players played poorly, or they're on a contract that is just too much for other clubs to take on themselves, which is something that Man United are truly guilty of. So the problems are multifaceted, but again, it all goes back to the fact that the people at the top, the board, the Glazers, Sir Jim, Ineos, do not make the decisions that they need to do. Sometimes they need to override the manager, sure, but you shouldn't be overriding the manager all the time and getting players like Manuel Ugarte, Donny van Beek that clearly don't fit into the manager's plan. Too often we've seen Manchester United play big money for players, completely screw up the relationship with the player, and then not get any money for them. To be the biggest club in the world, to have the largest revenues in the world of over £500 million, how can we be so daft in such basic things? And that's because we're not a football club. We're a business, a piggy bank business for Sir Jim now, as well as the Glazers. And that's all this is about. It's about money. Not about money for the squad, but money that goes into the pockets of our owners. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.